Alright, it's time for the Tanya Summary Shiur. It is week 51, Kananahara. We're almost there. We have less than a month until Yutes Kislev. And we are doing chapters 28 and 29 of Igeres HaKodesh, the fourth part of Tanya. And without any further ado, let's jump right into it. So the first chapter of this week, chapter 28, is the Alter Rebbe writing to Rebbe Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev to console him for the passing of his son, Meir, which is a sad event. And Alter Rebbe wanted to console him by extolling the great virtues of the son, and to explain perhaps the good that was accomplished in the world by this, if you could say such a thing, to explain the silver lining, if you will, and I'll let the Alter Rebbe speak for himself. So the Alter Rebbe says, he quotes the Midrash, or I should say the Gemara, that why is it that the passing of Miriam, the Tzaddikus Miriam, sister of Moshe Rabbeinu, so why is her passing mentioned in conjunction with the mitzvah of Parah Adumah? The mitzvah of Parah Adumah being the making of the red heifer, which is a sacrifice which is done outside of the temple, so an interesting kind of sacrifice. But the sacrifice is used in the process of purifying people from impurity that is imparted by the dead. So the Gemara says it's to teach you that just as the making of the Parah Adumah, just the making of the red heifer atones, so too does the passing of the righteous atone. So the Alter Rebbe says, you can ask, in that case, why is it in conjunction with the Parah Adumah, with the red heifer? It could have been in conjunction with the regular sacrifice for any sin offering. There are many of them in the Torah. Why particularly the red heifer? And particularly the red heifer is an interesting example because it's actually different from other sacrifices in that it is offered outside of the temple. So you would think, just bring a classic example. Obviously there's something more to the red heifer that needs to be brought out. So the Alter Rebbe quotes a lot of Kabbalah, and it's a summary shiur, so we're not going to start getting into all of the Kabbalah, but the crux of his answer is as follows, that a regular korban, a regular sacrifice, can only atone for that which is done unintentionally. That is to say, that a sacrifice will only atone for someone that commits a sin and doesn't realize that they're committing a sin. If a person desecrates Shabbos accidentally, if a person eats forbidden fats accidentally, whatever the sin may be, but it only atones for an accident. However, the Parah Adumah comes for something almost completely different, which is to say that it's called a chatas. It's called what literally translates to a sin offering. It's related to the word sin, something that's brought for a sin. However, the Parah Adumah is not something that an individual brings because they committed a sin and they want atonement. What it is it's a process that's done to be able to purify from the greatest impurity. The most stringent impurity is tumas meis, the impurity from the dead. And the Parah Adumah serves to fix that in a certain way. It doesn't fix the person being dead, of course, but rather, death in the world is a blemish in the world. It's that there's something wrong, there's something negative. The fact that there could be death is itself a concealment of godliness. Hashem is life. So the idea of there being death is in itself a concealment. And what the Parah Adumah, what the red heifer atones for, in a sense, the atonement that it brings, is that it takes the impurity that comes with being dead, and it says, no, there's a source, there's a place that we could reach that's above death. And it's like a ray, it's a shine of that. It's a shine of what is above death, and it's able to some small degree, cancel out the effect of death in the world. So the Alter Rebbe explains that almost counterintuitively, the passing of the righteous accomplishes the same thing. That is to say, Hashem loves all of his people, but particularly he cherishes the righteous. And when he takes the righteous from the world, what it accomplishes in the world is it brings the world one step closer. It reveals in the world one more aspect of ultimately death is not permanent. Ultimately there will come a time when there will be no more death. And it shines a revelation of that concept in the world, which is very counterintuitive. And is it a consolation? It's very hard to say about these things. What is a consolation? What isn't? Each person is consoled in their own respect. But ultimately what the Alter Rebbe is saying is that the passing of the righteous is supposed to bring out this aspect that it makes us realize, it makes us appreciate that we're coming closer and closer to a time that there will be no more death. So that concludes chapter 28. And chapter 29 gets interesting because on the one hand, it's almost halachic, almost by nature. We'll get into it. But on the other hand, it's also very Kabbalistic. So chapter 29, it starts out, the Alter Rebbe quotes the pasuk, Eishes Chayil Teres Baila, that a woman of valor is the crown, or the diadem. I'm not sure exactly how you translate the word Teres, but I'm going to use the crown. A woman of valor is the crown of her husband. And then he quotes the Gemara. It says, that it says in Pirkei Avos, someone that utilizes the crown is ka. And the Gemara says this refers to someone that studies halacha, which is the crown of Torah. And then the Gemara in Maseches Megillah quotes, it quotes Brisa from the Academy of Eliyahu, something that many people are familiar with because it's very commonly said on a daily basis, that anyone that studies halacha is ensured that they are a child of Olam Haba, of the world to come. So the Alter Rebbe says we need to understand, why is it that halacha receives such great status? It's the crown of Torah, and anyone that studies halacha, they're certainly going to go to Olam Haba. Why is it? What's so special about halacha? Not, I don't know, Kabbalah, not Gemara, not Tanakh, it's halacha. The Alter Rebbe says we also need to understand, why is it that the Chachamim place such an emphasis in the study of halacha in regards to the halachic obligation of studying Torah. Almost tautological, but halacha dictates that a person needs to study a chapter of halacha in the morning and a chapter of halacha at night. I should say particularly men need to study, men are chayav in Talmud Torah. So the question the Alter Rebbe wants to know is, why is halacha receiving such importance in the scheme of things? So the Alter Rebbe starts by explaining a concept in Kabbalah, which is that every person needs to fulfill all 613 mitzvahs in thought, speech, and action. It is very important. Now, there's a kind of a system where a king can accomplish mitzvahs on behalf of everyone, because the king is a general soul. Ultimately, the point is that we need to have kind of a layer of protection between us and Hashem, because Hashem is very intense, and we're not built for such intense things. We are built to be able to receive protection so that we can perceive Hashem. Ultimately, that is the point. That's what we're all striving for and yearning for, that we should be able to have a dwelling place for Hashem down here, and to that end, we need to be able to appreciate Hashem. But as things stand, we cannot appreciate Hashem. So what Hashem did is He made levushim, He made vestments, so that we can appreciate Hashem. And these vestments are accomplished through mitzvahs in thought, speech, and action, so that all of our faculties can be properly wrapped up and protected, so we can appreciate Hashem. Ultimately, this appreciation of Hashem is pleasure, the ultimate pleasure, if you will. So the other side of pleasure, the flip side of the coin, if you will, is will. That is to say that a person has things that they want, and they want things that give them pleasure. When a person has pleasure from something, the way that they interact with it is that they want. This is a deep concept discussed at length in Tzamach Vav, but again, this is a summary shiur, so we're not going to focus on any particular concept too deeply. But the point is that, this pleasure that we have in Hashem, that Hashem has in us, ultimately is expressed in an external way in the will of Hashem. And the Alter Rebbe then goes on to explain how the will of Hashem is essentially halacha. That is what halacha is. The Alter Rebbe explains that, in a sense, the Ratzon Hashem, the will of Hashem, is like a pillar standing from all the way at the top of the beginning of everything in the universe, not like a physical pillar per se, but that the entire purpose of creation is for Hashem's will to be expressed. It is an expression of Hashem's will, and Hashem's will stands all the way at the top, and it reaches all the way down here until this physical world, where we do physical things, and we take physical black paint, and we paint physical tefillin, and we do all mitzvahs in physical parameters. So ultimately, this world is a place, it's a playground for expression of Hashem's will. The Alter Rebbe then goes on to explain this is why it's so important to have a soul and a body doing actual mitzvahs, and not just having deep kavanas, And neshama is able to have deep intention. But the point is to have the actual mitzvah done, not to have all the deep intentions. The deep intention is great, and it shows that you're in line with what Hashem wants. But ultimately, what Hashem asks for, what Hashem's will ultimately is more than the intention to have the actual action performed. The actual mitzvah should be done instead of just be thought about. And this is what halacha is. Halacha is to tell us how the mitzvah ought to be performed. And halacha is, in a certain sense, it's like the crown of the rest of Torah, because the rest of Torah all contributes different ideas, different seminal ideas of how to ultimately fulfill the will of Hashem. And halacha is the final say. It's the top. It's the ultimate of everything that Torah comes to say. What we're supposed to do is ultimately the point of Torah, and that is halacha. So the Alter Rebbe says, this is the pasuk, Eishes Chayil Torah Spaila, a woman of valor is the crown of her husband, that Torah, halacha, receives from the rest of Torah. And it's like a woman receives from her husband that she's able to make a child, and halacha receives from the rest of Torah to be able to make that connection between us and Hashem, that we should be able to fulfill the will of Hashem. And this, as the Alter Rebbe explains, all the great virtues of halacha, why it's important to study halacha every day, and why Torah is called the crown, and why everyone that studies halacha is ensured that they are a child of Olam Haba. And that concludes Tanya for this week. And next week, we'll be discussing some more Agadatas, some more statements from Gemara Midrash relating to the collection of tzedakah. I'm looking forward to it. Mirz Hashem. I want this episode to be dedicated in honor of Tzvi HaKahin Ben Etel, who was, I found out after the time of the recording, was unfortunately killed for being a shliach of the Rebbe, for trying to make the world a better place. And it brought to mind at the beginning of this past week's Tanya the consolation, if you will, for the passing of tzaddikim that we should see in this, that hopefully it brings us one step closer to a time when death will be eradicated forevermore. And to that end, I want to dedicate this week's Tanya to his memory. The Yibashir should bench us with the speedy arrival of Mashiach Tzidkenu speedily in our days.